A stubborn HOA president tried to seize control of a private ranch. When the owner stood his ground, her obsession spiraled so far out of control that she even called the police, only to end up humiliating herself in front of the entire community. The ranch sat quietly on the edge of the suburban neighborhood, far enough to feel like a different world, but close enough that people often glanced at it when they drove by. It was large, open, and beautiful, with wide green fields, a small barn, a white wooden fence, and horses moving slowly in the distance. The man who owned it had worked for years to build this life. He loved the calm mornings, the sound of birds, and the feeling that his land was his sanctuary. Unlike the crowded streets nearby, his ranch gave him freedom, peace, and space to breathe. He was not a man who enjoyed gossip or neighborhood politics. He didn't go to parties or spend hours talking over fences about who was planting what, or who needed to mow their lawn. His happiness came from hard work and from the quiet satisfaction of knowing that the ranch was his place, untouched by anyone else's rules. He kept his fences strong, his land clean, and his animals healthy. His private property was not just land, it was the result of dedication, savings, and the dream of living freely. The neighborhood nearby was different. It was ruled by a homeowners association, an HOA, with strict rules about everything. How tall grass could grow, what colored doors could be painted, and even where cars could be parked. The man had never been part of it because his ranch was outside of their control. He paid no dues to them, followed none of their rules, and honestly, he liked it that way. His life was simple and stress-free, unlike many of the neighbors who often complained about the constant notices, fines, and the endless meetings. The HOA president was a woman known by nearly everyone in the neighborhood. She had a reputation for being strict, demanding, and always wanting things done her way. She often walked through the streets like she owned them, stopping to comment on people's gardens or reminding them about small violations. Some neighbors feared her, others disliked her, but most simply followed her orders to avoid trouble. She enjoyed the power of being in charge, and her title of president gave her an authority she carried proudly. For weeks, she had been eyeing the ranch. Every time she passed by, she looked at the wide fields and the open barnyard with something like envy. The land was so much bigger than any of the small backyards in the neighborhood. She imagined how perfect it would be for HOA events, family gatherings, or even community fairs. In her mind, it was almost wasteful that one man had all that space for himself. Why should he keep it private when so many people in the neighborhood could use it? The idea grew stronger in her thoughts each day until she finally decided to approach him. One sunny afternoon, the ranch owner was repairing a section of his fence when he saw her walking up the gravel path. She wore her usual sharp expression, the kind that suggested she had already made a decision before the conversation even began. She smiled tightly as if she were doing him a favor by visiting. "What a lovely place you have here," she said, her eyes sweeping across the open land. "I've been meaning to stop by and tell you how beautiful it looks. You must be very proud." The man nodded politely. He was used to people complimenting the ranch, but he could sense something behind her words, a tone that was not just admiration. "Thank you," he said simply, returning to his work. She did not take the hint. Instead, she stepped closer, resting her hands on the fence he had just repaired. "You know, it would be wonderful if the community could enjoy a place like this. We have so many families, and it's such a shame that we don't have wide open areas for gatherings. Your ranch would be perfect for events. Imagine the summer parties, the holiday celebrations. Everyone would love it." The man straightened, wiping the dust from his hands. He had expected this. Her compliments had been leading to something, and now it was clear what she wanted. "I understand your thought," he said calmly, "but this is private land. I built it for myself. I don't plan on hosting neighborhood events here." Smile faded slightly, but she quickly replaced it with a firmer look. "Of course I understand, but sometimes it's nice to think about the community, isn't it? After all, we all live so close together. Sharing this space could really bring people together." The man shook his head. "I respect the community, but this ranch is not part of it. It's mine. I take care of it, and it's not open for public use." There was silence for a moment. The president's eyes narrowed, and her lips pressed into a thin line. She was not used to being told no, especially not by someone who lived so close to her neighborhood. Most people bent to her will, but this man didn't. He stood tall, calm, and completely certain about his words. Her voice grew sharper. Well, perhaps you should reconsider. The neighborhood has needs, and sometimes sacrifices are necessary for the greater good. The man remained steady. This is not a sacrifice. I'm willing to make. My land is private, and I intend to keep it that way. She left soon after, but not with the same polite tone she had arrived with. As she walked back toward the neighborhood, her heels crunching on the gravel, the man could feel the shift in her mood. What had started as fake kindness had ended. With frustration and a bruise to her pride, she wanted control, but she had found someone who would not give it. For the ranch owner, the moment was small, just another reminder of why he valued his independence. He didn't want conflict, but he also wouldn't give in to demands that had no place on his property. For the HOA president, however, it was only the beginning of something bigger. Being denied had lit a fire in her. She would not let it go easily. The quiet days on the ranch continued, with horses grazing and the sound of wind moving through the fields. But beneath that peace was the shadow of something brewing. The HOA president's interest in his land had not ended, just begun. The days after the first meeting passed quietly on the ranch. The man continued with his usual routine, waking up early to feed the animals, repairing fences, watering the fields, and enjoying the peace that his land gave him. Didn't think much about the HOA president's visit. In his mind, it had been a simple conversation, and he had made himself clear. The land was his, and he had no reason to explain it further. He assumed she would understand that and move on. But he underestimated how much pride and control meant to her. The HOA president could not forget the way he had denied her. She kept replaying the moment in her mind, how he had stood calm and firm while she tried to convince him, how he had not shown even a little hesitation. Most people she dealt with in the neighborhood were quick to agree with her demands, whether they liked them or not. She was used to power. She was used to winning. Being told no by one man outside her authority was something she could not let go. A week later, while the ranch owner was repairing the gate by the road, he noticed her walking toward him again. This time, she wasn't smiling. Her face was serious, her steps quick, and her eyes sharp. He leaned against the fence, waiting. He knew this wasn't going to be a friendly chat. "Hello again," she said briskly. "I think we need to talk about the use of your land." The man tilted his head. "We already talked. My land is private. There's nothing more to discuss." She didn't like that answer. Her voice grew louder. "You don't seem to understand. The community needs a place for events, and your ranch is the most suitable. It's not right for one person to keep so much space for himself when so many families could benefit from it." The man stayed calm. He had dealt with stubborn people before, and raising his voice would only make things worse. "I understand your opinion," he said, "but this ranch is not part of your neighborhood. It is not under HOA control. It belongs to me, and I decide what happens here." Eyebrows furrowed. "You think you're separate from us, but this affects everyone. Your land is right next to our homes. It's part of the community whether you like it or not. You should contribute." The man gave a short laugh, not out of rudeness but disbelief. "I already contribute. I maintain my property. I don't bother my neighbors, and I live peacefully. That is all I owe. I'm not going to hand over my ranch for barbecues and meetings. I worked for this place, and it's mine." Her voice turned cold. "Selfishness doesn't go unnoticed. Can't hide behind your fence forever. Rules are rules, and everyone has to follow them." He looked her straight in the eye. "Not me. Your rules stop at the edge of my fence. My land isn't in your HOA. You have no power here." That answer hit her pride like a stone. Her cheeks flushed with anger, and for a moment she didn't know what to say. She was used to people backing down, but this man stood unshaken, his voice calm, his words firm. She opened her mouth to argue more, but nothing came out. Finally, she spun on her heel and stormed back toward the neighborhood without another word. The ranch owner returned to his work, shaking his head. He had no desire for a fight, but it was clear now that this was becoming one. The way she had spoken, the way her tone had turned sharp, told him she wasn't going to stop easily. Over the next few days, he began to notice her more often. Sometimes she would pass by slowly, her eyes fixed on the ranch as though she were inspecting it. Other times she would stand with another board member from the HOA at the edge of the road, pointing toward the fields and talking in hushed but heated tones. It was obvious she was stirring up trouble, trying to convince others of her idea that the land should be used for the good of the community. The neighbors started whispering too. A few of them, while driving past, stopped to chat with the man. One of them said, "She's been saying you're being unfair. Your land should be shared." Another shook his head and added, "Don't let her push you. Everyone knows this is yours. She just doesn't like being told no." The man listened, but stayed calm. "She can say what she likes," he replied. "The law is on my side." But inside, he knew the situation was growing tense. The HOA president wasn't just a woman with opinions. She was someone who believed she had authority even where she didn't. That made her dangerous. Because when people like her felt powerless, they often pushed harder. One evening, as the sun set over the fields, the man heard a car pull up near the ranch. He walked to the gate and saw the HOA president stepping out with two other board members. They walked straight toward him, determined, looks on their faces. "We've decided to ask one more time," she said firmly. "The community needs this ranch. We want to schedule events here. We're willing to call it cooperation. It will make things easier for everyone." The man crossed his arms. "I'll say this once more. This is my private ranch. It is not part of your HOA, not part of your community property. You have no right to demand anything here." One of the board members shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the president, seemed unsure about being part of this. But she stepped forward, her voice rising. "If you refuse, you'll be seen as a problem. Don't think people will support you when you turn your back on your neighbors."
Odd.
"The HOA has ways of handling people who don't cooperate." The man's voice stayed steady. "Change the truth. You don't own this land. You don't have control here. Leave now." Her face turned red with fury. She opened her mouth as if to shout, but seeing his calm and unshaken stance made her pause. Finally, she snapped, "You'll regret this," and marched away with her board members following behind. The man watched them go, a heavy feeling in his chest. It was no longer just about land. It was about pride, control, and power. The HOA president had made it clear she would not accept defeat. He had stood firm, but he knew deep down that this was not the end of the matter. The storm was only beginning to build. The following days became heavier with tension. The man tried to continue his routine, waking early, feeding the animals, repairing what needed fixing, and enjoying the open air of his ranch. But there was no denying it anymore. His quiet life had been disturbed. The HOA president was not letting go. Every other day he would notice her car parked near the edge of the road. Sometimes she stood outside with her arms crossed, glaring at the land as if it personally insulted her. Other times, she brought along other HOA members, pointing and gesturing wildly, her voice sharp and bossy even from a distance. At first, the man ignored her. He thought maybe if he didn't engage, she would eventually get bored and leave. Ignoring her only seemed to feed her obsession. One morning, while he was brushing down one of his horses, he heard the sound of voices outside the fence. When he walked over, he found the HOA president standing there with two more board members. She had a clipboard in her hand, like she was ready to make notes. She spoke with the confidence of someone who thought she was in charge. "We're here again to discuss access," she said loudly. "This is an opportunity for you to show you care about your community. You want to use your ranch for a neighborhood event next month. It would be perfect, and everyone would benefit." The man stood still for a moment, staring at her. He had already said no, had already explained himself. But here she was again, trying to wear him down with persistence. He walked up to the fence and looked her straight in the eye. "I told you before," he said firmly. "This is private land. It's not yours. It's not the HOA's. And I will not give you access." One of the board members shifted awkwardly, glancing at the president. "Maybe we should leave him be," the man muttered. But the president snapped her head toward him with a glare that shut him up instantly. She turned back to the ranch owner with fire in her eyes. "Do you really want to make enemies out of your neighbors?" she demanded. Everyone is talking. They all think you're being selfish. You want to be known as the man who refuses to help the community? The ranch owner leaned on the fence calmly. If your neighbors believe lies, that's on you. The truth is, this ranch is not part of your HOA. I don't owe you or anyone else the use of my land. I won't repeat myself again. Her face twisted with frustration. She hated that calmness in his voice, hated that he didn't get angry or defensive. She thrived on power struggles, on breaking people down until they gave in. Wasn't bending. After a moment of tense silence, she pointed her finger at him. You'll regret this stubbornness. You think you can stand alone, but the community is bigger than you. We'll make sure of it. Then she spun around and stormed off with her companions trailing behind. The man sighed as he watched them go. He knew this wasn't just about land anymore. This was about pride, control, and power. The president couldn't stand being told. No, and now she was determined to turn his refusal into a fight. A few days later, the situation escalated even further. The ranch owner was in his barn stacking hay when he heard the sound of footsteps outside. When he stepped out, he found the HOA president walking straight onto his property without even knocking or asking permission. Behind her were two more members, carrying folders and papers. What do you think you're doing? The man demanded, his voice sharper than usual. We're conducting an inspection, she announced, as if she had every right to be there. We've had complaints about the condition of your property, and as HOA representatives, we have the authority to check it. The man almost laughed at the absurdity. You have no such authority here. This is private land. You're trespassing. Leave now. She didn't move. Instead, she held her ground, her chin lifted high. When a property affects the community, it becomes our business. The ranch is an eyesore, and it could lower property values. We can't allow that. The man's jaw tightened. His ranch was clean, well-kept, and beautiful. Her words were nothing but a weak excuse to justify her intrusion. Get off my land, he said firmly, stepping closer. I'm warning you. For a moment, it looked like she might actually refuse to leave. Her pride wouldn't let her back down, but the look in his eyes, calm, firm, and unshaken, made her hesitate. She gave a frustrated huff, waved her hand for the others to follow, and stormed back off the property. The man knew now that she had crossed a line. This wasn't just pestering or arguing. She'd physically stepped onto his land without permission, trying to claim authority she didn't have. It was trespassing, pure and simple. He began to realize she wasn't just being difficult, she was dangerous. Word spread quickly around the neighborhood. Some neighbors started whispering about the HOA president's strange obsession. A few quietly told the man they supported him. She's going too far, one neighbor admitted. She's making a fool of herself. But others avoided talking to him at all, clearly afraid of being caught in the middle. The more resistance the HOA president faced, the more unhinged she became. She started sending letters printed on official-looking paper with the HOA logo, demanding that he cooperate with community expectations. She left notes stuck to his fence, each one sharper and more threatening than the last. One even said, "This is your last chance to avoid consequences." The man kept every letter, every note, every sign of her harassment. He knew it was only a matter of time before she tried something bigger, something even more outrageous. And he was right. One late afternoon, as he was sitting on his porch drinking coffee, he saw her again. She was standing at the road with a small group of neighbors, her voice loud and angry as she waved her arms toward his land. He couldn't hear every word, but he caught pieces of her speech. Selfish. Against the community. Won't last. Long. The neighbors nodded uneasily, some agreeing, others looking uncomfortable. The man leaned back in his chair, calm on the outside, but alert inside. He could see it clearly now. She wasn't just asking anymore. She wasn't just demanding. She was trying to rally people against him, trying to create pressure, trying to build a case that she had no right to make. He finished his coffee slowly, watching the group scatter, the president's voice still ringing through the evening air. He knew then that this wasn't going to end with arguments or notes. The HOA president was building toward something much larger, something that would drag him into an even bigger fight. The tension had reached its highest point. The ranch owner felt it in the air every time he walked outside. The HOA president had been circling his land for weeks, leaving letters, showing up with board members, and even trespassing. She had tried to pressure him, insult him, and turn neighbors against him, but nothing had worked. Every time he stood his ground with the same calm firmness. The land was his, and she had no right to it. For most people, that would have been the end. The truth was clear, the law was clear, and nothing more needed to be said. But the HOA president was not like most people. She was a woman who could not accept defeat. She believed that power was hers to hold, and being denied made her desperate. Her frustration finally boiled over into something extreme. It happened one warm afternoon. The ranch owner was out near the barn, fixing a loose hinge on the gate. The sun was setting low, throwing long shadows across the field. He was humming softly to himself, enjoying the simple work, when he heard the sharp screech of tires on gravel. He turned his head and saw the HOA president's car racing down the road. Stopping abruptly at the edge of his ranch, the car door slammed shut, and she stormed out, her face red with anger, her steps quick and heavy. In her hand she clutched her phone tightly. He sighed, already preparing himself for another heated conversation. But this time felt different. Her movements were more frantic, her eyes wilder. "You've left me no choice," she shouted the moment she was close enough to be heard. "You've disrespected me. You've disrespected this community, and I'm done with your arrogance." Ranch owner wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand, staying calm. "What are you talking about now?" Her voice cracked with fury. "You've refused every chance to cooperate. You've insulted the HOA, and you think you're above the rules. But today, you'll learn you're not untouchable. I've already called the police. They're on their way." For a moment, the man just stared at her. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. She had called the police. For what? He had done nothing wrong. His land was private. He was within his rights. Yet here she was, standing in front of him like she had finally won some great victory. "What exactly are you telling them?" he asked calmly. She lifted her chin, proud and defiant. "That you're denying community access, that you're refusing the HOA's lawful authority, that you may even be trespassing on property that should belong to the neighborhood. They'll settle this once and for all." The man shook his head slowly, disbelief turning into a quiet kind of anger. "You've lost your mind. This land is mine. I have the documents to prove it. You're wasting everyone's time, including the police." She smirked, her eyes glinting with satisfaction. "We'll see what they think. You won't be so smug when they arrive." It wasn't long before the sound of sirens broke the silence. Of the countryside, a patrol car rolled down the road, dust rising behind its tires. The ranch owner stood tall at his gate, his arms crossed, while the HOA president practically bounced with anticipation. She waved her arms as the car pulled up, calling out, "Officers, over here. This is the man I told you about." To police. Officers stepped out of the vehicle. One was tall and serious, the other younger, but equally professional. They glanced between the furious HOA president and the calm ranch owner, already sensing tension in the air. "Ma'am, what seems to be the problem?" the tall officer asked. The HOA president wasted no time. She launched into a dramatic speech, pointing at the ranch, her voice full of false authority. "This man refuses to let the community use this property. He is selfish, uncooperative, and breaking HOA rules. He's denying us access to land that belongs to everyone. You need to make him comply." The officers listened patiently, though their expressions showed a hint of doubt. When she finally finished, breathless and red-faced, the tall officer turned to the ranch owner. "Sir, can you explain your side of this?" The ranch owner nodded calmly. "Yes, I can. This ranch is my private property. It has never been part of the HOA. I bought this land, I maintain it, and I live here peacefully. The HOA president has been harassing me, demanding access that she has no right to. I have all the legal documents inside to prove that this land is mine and separate from the HOA." The officers exchanged a glance. The younger one asked, "Do you have those documents available?" "Of course," the ranch owner said, and he walked calmly into his house, A few minutes later, he returned with a neat folder. He handed it over, and the officers flipped through the paperwork carefully. Everything was in order. The deed, the maps, the legal proof that his ranch stood outside of the HOA's reach. The tall officer closed the folder and handed it back. His expression was clear, his tone firm. "Ma'am," he said, turning to the HOA president, "this land is not under your association's jurisdiction. You have no authority here. He is not required to give you access, and he is certainly not trespassing. You have wasted our time with a false report." The HOA president's face drained of color. She opened her mouth to argue, but the officer's stern gaze silenced her. "We don't take kindly to being misled," he continued. "Calling in false claims is serious. If you keep harassing this man or trespassing on his property, you could face legal consequences yourself. Do you understand?" Her hands trembled at her sides. For the first time, her confidence cracked. But this affects the community," she stammered weakly. "It's unfair." "Doesn't matter," the officer interrupted sharply. "The law is clear. Leave this man alone." The HOA president stood frozen for a moment, her pride shattered, her power slipping through her fingers. She had expected the police to take her side, to force the ranch owner into submission, but instead, she was the one being scolded. Her mouth opened and closed like she wanted to argue, but no words came out. Finally, with a frustrated huff, she spun around and marched back to her car. Slamming the door so hard the windows rattled, the officers turned back to the ranch owner. The younger one gave a small nod of respect. "Sorry about the trouble. Sir, looks like you've had a rough time with her." The ranch owner shrugged lightly, though inside he felt both relief and anger. "I appreciate you coming out. I knew I wasn't in the wrong. She just doesn't like being told no." The tall officer gave him a steady look. "Keep your paperwork handy in case she tries again. And if she trespasses or harasses you further, don't hesitate to call us. People like her usually don't stop easily, but the law is on your side." With that, the officers returned to their car and drove away, leaving the ranch quiet once again. The only sound was the soft rustle of wind in the fields and the distant whinny of a horse. The man stood by his gate for a long time, watching the HOA president's car disappear into the distance. He felt the weight of what had just happened. She had crossed a line, tried to use the law against him, and ended up humiliated instead. It should have been the end of it. The truth was clear, and the law had spoken. But as he turned back toward his ranch, he knew deep down it wasn't truly over. A woman like her, consumed by pride and power, would not accept defeat so easily. This battle had ended in his favor, but another one was sure to come. The neighborhood was buzzing after the incident with the police. Word spread quickly, because in small communities, nothing stayed quiet for long. Everyone had seen the flashing lights outside the ranch, and curious neighbors had watched from their porches as the police spoke to both the ranch owner and the HOA president. By the next morning, whispers filled the streets. Some people laughed quietly about how the president had embarrassed herself, while others shook their heads at the drama. Linda, the once fearsome leader of the HOA, was now the subject of gossip, and she hated every second of it. The ranch owner, however, carried on with his life. He rose early each morning, fed his animals, repaired his fences, and worked the land with the same steady rhythm as before. His ranch was his pride, his escape, and he refused to let the HOA president's antics ruin it for him. He had faced her demands, her threats, and even the police being called on him, and he had stood firm through it all. For him, the peace of knowing he was right was enough. But for the HOA president, things were very different. Her reputation had been shaken. Neighbors who once obeyed her without question now looked at her differently. Some avoided her entirely, while others began openly criticizing her leadership. At the next HOA meeting, a man raised his hand and asked sharply, "Why are we wasting time fighting a landowner who has nothing to do with us? That's not what we pay dues for." Another neighbor added, "You embarrassed all of us when you called the police for no reason." The president's face burned with humiliation as complaints rolled in. She tried to defend herself, claiming that she had acted in the best interest of the community. But the more she spoke, the less convincing she sounded. The power she once held so tightly was slipping away. For the first time in years, she realized that people weren't afraid of her anymore. The ranch owner heard about this through a few friendly neighbors who stopped by to chat. One of them, a kind woman from down the road, leaned on the fence one evening and said, "You should have seen her face at the meeting. She thought everyone would back her up, but they turned on her. She's losing control." He nodded, not gloating but quietly satisfied. He had never wanted to fight, but if standing firm meant exposing her abuse of power, then it was worth it. He thanked the neighbor for the update and went back to his chores, glad that the truth was finally coming to light. Still, the HOA president could not bring herself to admit defeat. Even after the police had warned her, even after her neighbors criticized her, she clung to her pride. She stopped coming near the ranch, but the bitterness in her heart grew. She avoided eye contact with the man when she happened to drive by, pretending not to see him. Though inside she burned with anger every time she passed his land. Meanwhile, the ranch remained what it had always been, a place of peace and freedom. The man found himself appreciating it even more after everything that had happened. When he walked through the fields at sunrise, with the dew glistening on the grass and the air cool against his skin, he felt a deep sense of gratitude. He had fought for his land not with fists or shouting, but with calm, steady truth, and he had won. That victory gave him a stronger connection to his ranch than ever before. The neighbors began to respect him more as well. Some who had once believed the HOA president's lies now saw him differently. They waved when they drove past, sometimes stopping to say hello. One family even brought him a basket of fresh-baked bread, thanking him for standing up to the president. "You showed her she can't control everything," the father said with a smile. "It's about time someone did." The ranch owner didn't see himself as a hero, but he appreciated the kind words. To him it was simple. Everyone deserved the right to protect what was theirs. No one, no matter how powerful they thought they were, had the right to take that away. For the HOA president, her downfall continued. Over the following months, her influence shrank. People grew tired of her strict rules and constant nagging. More and more neighbors spoke up against her, emboldened by the example of the ranch owner who had refused to bend. Eventually, there was talk of voting her out of her position. Some even suggested dissolving the HOA entirely, tired of the endless drama it brought into their lives. The ranch owner watched all this from a distance. He had no interest in their politics, no desire to be part of their meetings or debates. His only concern was his ranch, his animals, and his quiet life. But he couldn't help but notice the change. The community seemed lighter somehow, freer, as though a heavy weight had been lifted off their shoulders. One crisp autumn evening, the man stood on his porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sun sink behind the hills. The sky burned with orange and gold, and the horses grazed peacefully in the fading light. He thought about everything that had happened, the visits, the threats, the police. He thought about how the HOA president had tried to break him down, how she had thrown everything she could at him, and how none of it had worked. It wasn't just a personal victory. It was a lesson about boundaries, respect, and the importance of standing firm. People like the HOA president thrived on fear and control, but when someone refused to be intimidated, their power crumbled. That was exactly what had happened here. The man smiled faintly to himself as he took another sip of coffee. Life on the ranch had returned to normal. The air was quiet again, the only sounds the soft calls of animals and the rustling of the trees in the wind. The drama felt like a distant storm that had finally passed, leaving behind clear skies and calm waters. And yet even as things settled, the story of the HOA president's meltdown remained alive in the community. Neighbors still told it at barbecues and gatherings, shaking their heads in disbelief at how far she had gone. Some laughed about it, while others used it as a warning, a reminder of what happens when pride and control go too far. The HOA president herself never apologized. Her pride wouldn't let her, but she no longer had the same fire she once did. She attended meetings less often, avoided confrontations, and kept her head down. The fight with the ranch owner had broken something in her, the illusion of power she had held for so long. As for the man, he carried no hatred toward her. He had no interest in revenge or payback, simply wanted peace, and now he finally had it again. His ranch stood strong, a symbol of his independence, a reminder that some things were worth protecting, no matter the cost. And so life moved forward. Seasons changed, fields grew and were harvested, and the ranch continued to be a place of hard work and quiet joy. The man knew there would always be challenges, but he also knew he had the strength to face them. After all, he had faced the storm of the HOA president and come out stronger than before. The ranch remained his sanctuary, untouched by rules, untouched by control. A piece of freedom carved into the edge of the neighborhood. And for the man who owned it, that was all he had ever wanted.